So I see people are starting to filter in. So I'm just going to give it 1 minute of looking awkward, and then we'll start to get started. So firstly, I may just welcome people to our latest Simon Talk. If you are tweeting or using social media, please do. Lorcan has lots of interesting things to say, so the further we get the word out, the better. If you can use the hashtag Simon Talks, that'd be great as well. This is a series that we've been doing since pretty much since the lockdown with COVID, and what we've found is as an organization, we actually find them really useful ourselves. So what we wanted to do was take a lot of the learning. So colleagues like Lorcan Sirr, who's speaking to us today, are people that I would engage with regularly as we develop our policy work, to get a variety of opinions and a variety of knowledge into the work that we produce. And I suppose these talks are really about sharing that to a wider audience, to get, because it's not just about what, the Simon opinion, it's about making sure that we're increasing the knowledge overall. And so I suppose if we find it useful, we thought other people might find it useful. So that was the impetus behind these talks, and the reason, in part, why Lorcan is here today. So to introduce him formally, Lorcan is the is a senior lecturer in housing, planning and development at TU Dublin, and he's visiting professor at URV, which is a university in Tarragona in Spain, and an author of numerous articles on housing. His most recent book, Housing in Ireland Beyond the Markets, was published in February 22, and before that, Housing in Ireland, the A to Z Guide. I think Lorcan's going to give a plug to his book at the end of his presentation, so I won't go much beyond to say that it's a really excellent contribution, and Lorcan has edited some really interesting thinkers about housing and brought in some of the ideas beyond what we would usually hear. So I think it really is a valuable contribution, but I'm sure you'll say a little bit more about it. Lorcan is going to talk to us today about what's happening in our housing system, particularly as it relates to build and how that impacts both home buyers, but also I suppose that it feeds down to how that whole system is impacted, or how affordability is impacted by the current crisis that we're in, and maybe some suggestions about what we can do on the other side. And then Lorcan's going to talk for about 35 minutes, and then we're going from there. We'll open it out to questions. So if you do have questions, please do put them into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try and get to them all. And these things work best if people put the questions. So as they occur to you, just put them in, and we'll get to them as we go. So with that, I'm going to say thanks to Lorcan for doing this for us, and hand over to him.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne, and thanks to everybody in the Simon community for giving me the opportunity to do God's work here, untangling lots of series of data from the Department of Housing, who are known for not presenting the data in the most easily accessible form, and revenue and CSO and various different sources of data. And I'd say my colleague Mel Reynolds has done the sterling work in unpicking a lot of particularly the Department of Housing data and putting it into a kind of an accessible and comprehensible format. So we'll go through some of that at the start. I have about 5 different series of data that I want to go through, and if we're out of time, we can skip them, but I'm happy to make a PDF of this afterwards and send it on to people who want to go through it in more detail. And you can always email me afterwards as well, lorcan.sirr@tudublin.ie. I'm happy to answer questions as best I can on that. So the first, well, let me see, can I share the screen here? This one, I think, I'm sharing. So if somebody could just confirm that, Wayne, can you confirm that you can see that here before I get going?
No, we can't see it yet.
No, you can't see it yet. Okay, well, that's a bit of an issue there already. Let me see, we'll share the other screen there, share this one.
That's it.
That's it. You can see that one there, yeah?
Yeah, you just need to go to full screen first, and then we'll
just on that there. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Lovely. Okay. So anyway, thanks to Wayne and Anna Marie and the people in Simon for this. So If you want to pop in with a question or if you want to interrupt me, I don't mind. I tend to work on a fairly casual basis, so that if you want to stop me halfway through and ask for something, do that. Otherwise, pop a question in the chat or wait till we get going. I'm going to start with social housing output. So this data is pretty much hot off the press. It's hot off the press in that the numbers were released a few weeks ago. Just turn off my printer so it doesn't start going. The numbers were released a couple of weeks ago, but the format in which the numbers are released, as anybody who's involved in this will know, make it incredibly difficult to kind of parse it and to apply it like we have done here. And this is Mel Reynolds staying up late at night with his Excel spreadsheets and working this out. So what this table shows you is county by county, the number of local authority bills. Column 2 there, or column 3 really, is local authority turnkey purchases. These have been reclassified by the Department of Housing as turnkey, construction turnkey, which is slightly a bit of an oxymoron, to be honest with you. Then we have AHB bills in the middle column, AHB turnkeys, which are purchases, and then the totals. And we go down to the councils on the left, the local authorities on the left, start with Carlow and Galway, and then at the bottom there, I think you guys can see this, my mouse, at the bottom, we've just extracted there the 4 Dublin ones to look at to see what they're doing. So a couple of things stand out really when you start looking at this, and I have to say, you've no idea how unbelievably difficult this is to do, because it's released as a huge long PDF, development by development, and it takes a lot of perspicacity and a lot of dedication and sweat to go through and come up with something like this. So there's a few kind of standout things that even if you look through it yourself, you'll know, particularly the zeros. And the most glaring zero to me is Fingal, local authority, who built nothing last year and bought nothing last year as well. Now, I have a feeling there's a certain minister whose constituency is up there in Fingal, might well be the Minister for Housing, and that's a zero, a big fat zero for Fingal, for both purchases, turnkey purchase and the bills. The HBs in Fingal, did in total 74 bills and 332, so 406 houses, all by AHBs, and most of those were turnkeys. The next big standard one is South Dublin, the local authority, county council, who managed to build 2 houses last year and bought 0. And again, the AHB stepped in there. Well, they only built 1 in South Dublin, but they bought or turnkey 243, so they end up with 246. So South Dublin, these are significant local authorities in the country, obviously, as we know. And the other standout, of course, is Cork City. The Taoiseach's own, I want to just cop down, is the Taoiseach's own stomping ground of Cork City, who local authority who built none and bought none last year either. So that there to me are standards, given the housing needs in these large urban areas and the amount of land that's available as well. Dublin City didn't cover itself in glory either. There's 150 new builds in Dublin City and 4 turnkeys, and the 150, if I'm not mistaken, were PPPs, so not really direct bills as such. And the thing about particularly Dublin City, if I go back to an Oireachtas submission by Mel Reynolds in the Oireachtas there not that long ago, the Dublin City Council themselves have about 85 hectares of land zoned residential, which will give you, although Devony Garden type densities will give you around 17 or 18,000 houses capacity. And again, NAMA, the debtors in NAMA in Dublin City, again, have even more than that. They have 90 something hectares, which again, they give you, 17, 18, 19,000. So between Dublin City Council and NAMA debtors in the Dublin City Council area, there's capacity for well over 30,000 houses there. So this all starts to make sense, or when you put it in context of what the weighting, the social housing waiting list is in these local authorities. So you start to see in Dunleary right down, I just start at the top right there, Cavan County Council, and you think kind of rural areas, that's not as important in rural areas. It actually is, because Cavan had a total of 37 social houses between AHBs and the council last year, but the waiting list is 414 households. So, it's quite significant, the difference between what they're delivering and what their waiting list is. Clare, 75 houses delivered last year, and the waiting list is 1,100 households. Again, Sligo, 21 last year and 517 households. So it's not just in the large urban areas that we're lacking, it seems to be in the rural ones as well. And SD, South Dublin, that built 2 last year, they have a waiting list of over 5,000 households. Now, they delivered 246 altogether, but even that is pretty poor in the context of what's needed out there. Cork City waiting list, built zero, bought zero last year, the council, and waiting list of 4,501 households. The 4 Dublin local authorities have a social housing waiting list, and this is last year's one, of 25,797 households, and managed the grand total of 175 houses, new builds last year, and 1,000 overall between the 4 local authorities, turnkeys, purchases, AHBs, and builds, managed 1,075 houses. And you know, there's a need for nearly 26,000 houses there. So the total waiting list is just over 59,000 households, and last year through build and turnkeys, councils and AHBs managed 4,806. And I wouldn't really be criticising the AHBs in this, but you know, it's the councils who really are the ones who are kind of showing themselves to be wanting here. And in fairness to the councils, it's never clear whether it's a lack of want on the council's behalf or lack of will or whatever, or if obstacles are in their way via the processes that they have to go through with the Department of Housing and so on. So that all has to be unpicked. And I know if you talk to councillors, they'll bring the Department of Housing. Council officials will tell you that secretly as well, or off the record. But you can see that it's performance is not great really, and it's not up much on the year before either. So if I'm going on to the next slide. So in 2021, so last year, local authorities and AHBs satisfied about 8.78% of the total housing need through building, to what they call new builds. Not really all new builds, new buildings, but necessarily new builds. So just 8.75. Now that's up on the previous year when it was 7.64. And the 4 Dublin local authorities completed 4.61% of their housing waiting list need through new builds. That was down from nearly 6% the year before. This is just picking out at the top graph here, the top table here, Mel has picked out going back 2016. So, you know, with the year that Rebuilding Ireland came in effectively to 2021 here, and looking at nationally what local authorities and what have done in terms of builds and in terms of turnkeys, and then the AHBs in terms of builds and in terms of turnkeys, now called construction rather than purchase, but they're purchase. And we can see that the total local authority bills over from the middle of 2016 to 2021, it was 5,766 overall. You pull out the Dublin ones, so the bottom table here is just the Dublin ones, and we can see that local authority bills since 2016 to 2021, 1,667. AHB turnkeys are the big winner here with just over 3,000 over the year. So you can see local authorities delivered in total since 2016, 2,172 houses, and AHBs delivered 3,768 in Dublin. Nationally, it's about 9,500 by local authorities and just over 11,000 by AHBs. The interesting thing to look at is that are these figures here, the turnkey purchases and the builds. Just move on to the next one here. So when we start to highlight these things here, and what they show you really are the trends over the years. And the reason these tables are here is to show the trends over the years. And what you can see is nationally, from Rebuilding Ireland until the end of last year, bills are constituting just over half, 55.77% of all social housing output, and turnkey purchases are constituting about 44%. In Dublin, it's a bit better. New builds are constituting about 66, or just over 66%, 2/3 of all output, and turnkeys are about 1/3, which is better. And that trend, we'll come to the trend in a second. So that's where we're at with those. Now, in these figures, you'll see in a minute that the figures differ slightly from the Department of Housing, and basically 2 sets of figures. And in these figures, they have also included some Part 5 numbers, which really shouldn't be in it, because they're neither new builds by local authority or AHBs nor turnkeys, but they've for whatever statistical shenanigans are going on, there's also some new builds included in the overall output, there's also some Part 5s included in the new build output, which shouldn't be. So the thing to look at here is the trends. So the trends that I can see is nationally AHB turnkey purchases are up like tenfold basically in the last 5-6 years, and similar in Dublin. Local authority bills are slowing massively nationally, and Dublin local authority bills are kind of falling off a cliff, to be honest with you. You know, in 2018, we had over 634, and that has slumped now to 175. And most of those were PPP anyway, Dublin City Council. So they're kind of falling off a cliff. And in Dublin, in general, local authority activity is slowing. So I don't know what's happening in the local authorities or what's going on in the background there, but activity has kind of fallen off a cliff in Dublin, really. This is from the National Oversight and Audit Commission. So it's NOAC. And just looking at our overall stock, because it's all very well to talk about the amount of houses that we're building every year, but let's not forget that we do have, you know, a tenant purchase scheme where council tenants basically have a right to buy out their house at a discount. So we are losing housing stock every year through various reasons, but you know, quite a lot of it is through tenant purchase, but also buildings being demolished, etc. So it's important to look at, you know, the net gains rather than the gross ones every year, the headline numbers. So the total, this top figure here is, I just got rid of the top part of the table. It's just going through every local authority. The increase from January 27 to December 2020, we added 9,753 social houses nationally to the stock. So an average of 2,438 per annum. So what that figure is taking account of things like tenant purchase and demolition of council units, etc. So that's the net addition per annum is just under 2,500. In Dublin, the same thing again. You can see 2017, January, December 2020, what they added. So Dublin City Council, for example, added 1,477 houses over 4 years to the housing stock, so an average of 369. The total in Dublin is on 659 per annum for the 4 local authorities. Actually, Dún Laoghaire down have managed to lose an average of 10 units per year. And again, that's, you know, we do have a legally enforceable or a legal right to buy your tenant purchase, and then there's all sorts of, you know, other planning and development issues that means you could lose stock. But it is important to look not just at the headline figures, but look also at the net figures. The state is also involved in the second-hand market. So we see non-household purchases. So non-household purchases are funds and local authorities, basically, not ordinary families buying houses, has gone from 16% to 23% of all second-hand purchases in Dublin since 2017, and nationally from 13 to 16%. So you can see the non-household stuff is so that's funds and local authorities. But in councils themselves, are averaging about 2,200 purchases of second-hand houses every year from 2017 to the end of 2020. And then Deeper have a report that shows that 1/3 of all second-hand purchases in Dublin 10, which is Crumlin, and Dublin 17, which is Coolock, came from the local authority, Dublin City Council in this case, acquisition programme in 2019. And among Evan, it was nearly 20%, Newbridge 18%, Longford 12%. So it's a national thing where councils are going to buy second-hand houses. I'm not going to get into the debate about whether they should be or not doing that, but it is a fact that they're out there and they're competing against other people who are looking to buy houses, the same as they do with the turnkeys in effect. This table, so we'll just move on a little bit. This is overall housing output, so the amount of houses we build by type. And what I'm interested in here is how many houses every year do we build that come to the market. So in other words, that appear in your D&G, your Sherry Fitzgerald, your Lisney, your local estate agent window. And because housing output has gone up significantly, in fairness, since 2016, 2017, but actually the number of houses coming to the market hasn't gone up, which is the curiosity here. So if we look at this table, the black line is just the years, obviously. So then I'm breaking it down by single houses or one-off houses, typically rural houses, bungalows and two-story houses. They never come to the market because they're generally built for people. Apartments and scheme houses are the CSO definition of scheme houses. They call it scheme houses, housing estates, basically. So you can see the total output has gone from just under 14,500 in 2017 to nearly 20,500 in 2021. Grand. So the output has gone up by 43% in that period. But what I want to do then is take away all the things that don't actually appear in your estate agent window. So the two big ones that don't appear in your estate agent window are bungalows and apartments nowadays, really, because the vast majority of apartments, 95% of apartments, are reserved for build to rent or investment funds, really. So when you start to take away the red line from the green line above, what it shows you is the amount of housing coming to the market every year, which is this green line in the black box here. So in 2017 it was 6,840. Last year it was about 5,700. So as output has gone up by 48%, 49%, the amount of housing coming to the market has gone down by about the same amount. So the percentage of housing coming to the market was nearly half of all housing in 2017 would come to the market. In other words, mostly housing estates and some apartments, but mostly, and they'd appear in your window. You know, your big companies building housing estates and you go and buy a brand new house. That has gone down, typically targeted first time buyer. That has gone down last year to just under 28%, so just over 1 in 4 houses. At the same time, as output has gone up from 14,000 to over 20,000. So there is an issue here that this is a big issue, I think. And this is the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about, is that output is output for ordinary people on ordinary wages looking for a house to buy. And why wouldn't they? That's the way it works in Ireland. The availability of stock has plummeted nearly by the same amount, by the same percentage as the output overall has gone up. So what's driving that? So if you look at the bottom black box here, we can see that scheme housing, so housing estates basically as a percentage of output, is relatively, it has gone up and down. It's now about 52%, so just over half of all housing is housing estates. Single housing, this is where the rural, independent rural alliance go mad. It's gone down from nearly 30% to just under 24%. So that's the one-off housing. There seems to be a crackdown on one-off housing, and it seems to be having an impact on as a percentage of all housing. But like that was way up at 40% at one stage for a long term. The two red boxes at the end, build to rent as a percentage of output has gone from just under 11% to nearly a quarter of all housing, and the same with social housing as a percentage of output is gone from just under 12% to over a quarter of all housing. So they're the two components that are responsible for the increase, effectively the 48%, 43% increase in housing output over since 2017 is mostly councils buying turnkeys and building a few houses, and then the build to rent apartments. And at the same time, it means that the amount of housing, literally the numerical amount of housing has gone down from at a peak of 7.7 to now 5,698, and as a percentage, it's gone down to just over 1 in 4 of all houses. This is a really important point, that we're not building houses for people to buy, effectively. So you can see from 2017 to 2021, an average of just over 7,000 houses a year have come to the market. There's a huge pent-up demand for new housing out there, but yet the planning system has been tweaked to effectively disincentivize new house building, to finance planning development, and do everything to incentivize other types of housing, particularly apartments, co-living, student housing, so every planning tweak effectively has made housing less affordable and has meant that less housing is coming to the market every year. And for 2022, the target, this is in the Housing for All target this year. So rather conveniently, the Department of Housing have their target of 24,600 homes this year, 9,000 social houses, great, 4,100 affordable cost rental, that's brilliant, 11,500 private rental and private ownership. And the two numbers are bundled in together. And if you read the document, you can't unpick what it is. And Killian Woods, in fairness to him from the Business Post, asked the question of what's the breakdown of rental and ownership and that, and the answer was about 2/3, 1/3, which means that their target this year for housing coming to the market is 7,600 houses, which is weak, to be honest with you. That it's not ambitious enough, really. And as long as you keep giving financial advantage to the large funds and everybody else for co-living, build to rent, and there's a space for those people as well. There's a space for everybody, but the balance is wrong at the moment. But until you rebalance that, there aren't going to be enough new build houses for people out there to buy, and that's going to push them A, into renting, or B, living at home with their parents, or C, abroad. This couple of next 2 or 3 slides are the things that as planning and development people we do in first year in here, but yet a lot of the commentators about housing out there don't really get this, and this kind of explains quite well why the sales price of new houses are never really going to drop. and policy is kind of designed to maintain the sales price. Particularly with things like Help to Buy, and even the former governor of the central bank was saying yesterday, saying Help to Buy is a mad idea, which it was. It just pushes house prices up. So government policy is all about helping people afford what's on offer rather than making what's on offer more affordable. And this is why. So if you look at the first column here, this is a basic residual valuation, we call it. So it's a basic maths of if I'm going to build houses as Lorcan Sirr Development Inc. and I'm going to build houses. This is the kind of stuff that we do in an Excel spreadsheet to make sure that we're going to make money out of it and that it's going to work. So what you need to look at is the sales price, the new sales price of my new Lorcan Sirr houses, 371,000. That means I can afford to pay about 60,800 per site. If I pay any more than that, I'm not going to make enough money. If the sales price goes up by 10%, look at the residual site value down here. My site is now worth 89,000. This means the value of all my other land that I own as Lorcan Sirr Property Development Incorporated has also gone up. So if I increase the sales price, or if the sales price of new housing increases by 10%, there's a 46% uplift in the value of my land. That is hugely significant. The same when you look at apartments. Actually, it's better when you look at apartments because there tend to be more of them on the same piece of land. If the sales price per apartment, these are SCSI numbers, so we're not making up these numbers. This is the book that I'm going to PR in a minute. Mail Reynolds did a chapter book about this kind of stuff, and this is property development 101 that we teach in here. So if the sales price of a new apartment is 411,000 and it goes up by 10% because it's a lack of supply or government policy or whatever, the effect on the rest of my land is even more pronounced. So you can see that my site was originally worth 46,000, it's now worth 78,000. So 10% uplift in new sales price will lead to a 68% uplift in my land value. Now you think about that, just to put that in context. If I'm a big builder and I build 1,000 units a year and my company is worth 500 million, the 500 million share price value of my company is not from building 1,000 units of houses every year. That'd be phenomenal profit. It's from the land bank that I own. If I own 10,000 other sites. So any effect on this, and just to make it clear that the opposite also happens if the sales price goes down, the value of my land goes down. So if I have 10,000 sites and I see each site going up by 68%, I'm quids in. If I see the sales price going down and I see the sales price, the residual value of my land going down by 48% in houses or 68% with apartments, and then I don't want that because the value of my entire company goes down. So these companies that are building 1,000, 1,500 houses a year, their list price is not about the profit from the housing, it's about the potential they have at the land bank that they have. So this is why sales prices are so important to the valuation of these large companies and anybody with a land bank, in fairness, anybody who has land. A lot of people don't get that. And I did this for politicians there recently, and the penny dropped with a lot of them about why the sales price, why government policies, it seems to be about maintaining the sales price for a handful of people who are lucky enough to own land, has to be said. This next bit is about stamp duty transactions. So we're just looking at first, so it's probably a bit hard to see, but you'll get it in PDF anyway. Stamp duty transactions, first-time buyers and second-time buyers. So what I'm looking at here, the first line, 2017 to 2021. What I'm looking here at is the number of nationally first-time buyers are up by 5.8% year on year. By average over the 5 years. Others though, so second-time buyers and others are down by 20%. So it's wonder what's happening there. And in Dublin, it's even more pronounced. So your first-time buyer in Dublin, these are revenue transactions, stamp duty transactions. First-time buyers are down 30% in the last 5 years in Dublin. Second-time buyers are down nearly 46%. Now, a second-time buyer, a lot of people, everybody knows what first-time buyers. A lot of people have, I think, a caricature in their head of a second-time buyer is maybe somebody whose kids have finished university and flown the nest and they're going to buy somewhere more suitable to their needs or whatever you want to call it. Actually, a lot of second-time buyers are people who bought an apartment when they're in their 20s and then, got married or settled down with somebody and had kids, and of course the apartment is not suitable. So they're buying another house or they're buying a bigger house or they want to, they want more space. So second-time buyers are quite often young people as well. They're not necessarily, people near retirement or kids have flown the nest or any of that kind of stuff at all. They're quite often young people who just happen to have bought something, get on the property ladder, and they did, and then, discovered that it's not, living in 36 or 38 square meters is not really suitable for anything for more than a few months. So we can see that these numbers are really significant in Dublin. And so the question is, are first-time buyers and other second-time buyers more so being displaced in Dublin from the market, and if so, by whom? Is it local authorities buying houses, all the turnkeys that are being bought by HBs and by local authorities, or is it the build to rent crowd, that part of the industry buying up land and building apartments and no houses, so there's nothing for them to buy effectively. So that's an interesting statistic. And then looking at nationally at stamp duty transactions, and particularly here looking at non-household completions, so states and funds, and we can see that the activity of the state, so local authorities effectively, and the funds has gone from 16.77% in 20, this is nationally, right? So this is people, this is funds buying housing, okay? State and funds, 16.77% to nearly 41% in 2021. At the same time as first-time buyer new home purchasers has gone from 54%, 53% to 36%. So the state's involvement, if you look at stamp duty transactions, has gone up threefold or nearly threefold, and the first-time buyers has gone down from 53 to 36%. In Dublin, this is even more pronounced. We can see the state and funds has gone from 36.68% of all stamp duty transactions for new homes to 65%. At the same time as first-time buyer new home purchases has gone from 57% to 31%. So something is forcing first-time buyers out of the market, and could it be the non-household completions? Of course it is. So there's some questions that arise out of all this. And the big one for me, because it's something that I talk about a lot, is the future of home ownership. What's going to happen to home ownership if there's no homes to buy, and if the homes that are there are unaffordable? It looks like the 43% output increase in total output from 2016 to 2021 has been driven by the state. Their output, their involvement in new home market has gone up 200%, 205%, in funds by 131%. And the question has to be asked, like, what are the positives here? What are the positives of AHBs and local authorities out buying turnkey housing? And they will argue there are positives, and you can argue both ways, but these are questions we need to ask. Should they not just be building more? They have so much land, should they not be building more rather than out buying more? How, or should we seek to increase the number of houses that come to the market above that 7,000 average every year? I think we need to have a long strategic look at home ownership, from not from a housing perspective, but from a pension perspective, from a state finance perspective. It should be the Department of Taoiseach or deeper involved in this, up to their necks in looking at this. Instead, we're creating a pension scheme for young people that will basically future save their rent when they retire, and they don't have to afford to pay the rent because they're on a pension. They will have paid into another pension that will help them pay the rent. The potential irony is that the pension company that they're paying into might well own the building, but they can't afford to pay the rent in when they retire. So there's we're going down in circles here, not actually thinking about this a whole lot. What does the future look like if home ownership and market output continues in its current trend, particularly home ownership and the output 7,000 a year? And then, we have to ask the question, is it better to subsidize home ownership rather than, basically promoting home ownership in Ireland, rather than subsidizing Canadian teachers' pensions, which is what happens when you're paying your rent to some of these large investment funds, and their pensions for Canadian teachers and New York firefighters and Boston, ambulance drivers, all that kind of stuff. So we have to ask, these questions are not being addressed. So we'll rip on through to this one. This is about density and the whole argument around density, and that we need to build denser and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So these are European statistics. Eurostat is basically the CSO for Europe. And I've indicated Ireland down here. And the yellow is the percentage of apartments that we have in Ireland. Part of our building stock. Blue is terraced and semi-Ds, and red is the kind of one-off housing. And we always get told about the percentage of housing is very low. Of course, it's low on average if you're looking at, Leitrim and Roscommon as well as Dublin. But in Dublin, it's around 35% of our housing stock is apartments. So it's actually doing quite well. And we compare very well with a lot of European cities. But look at the Dutch people just ahead of us. See that blue line there? It's nearly the same, if not bigger, than the blue line here, which is semi-detached and terraced houses. Okay. The interesting thing about the Netherlands, of course, is that there's 3.5 times our population in a country about half the size of Ireland. And yet they managed to have the same amount of housing stock in terraced houses or semi-Ds rather than going high. The argument here is, we need to go high to get dense. Actually, you don't need to go high to go dense. You need to design better to go dense. And these are examples of mostly new, this one is old, but mostly new housing developments in the Netherlands. There's car parking there as well. It's usually around the back. So there is parking there. It's just not on the street because they don't believe in that. But this is how and the significance of this is building high is expensive. So building high means we don't get affordability. Everybody will tell you that building high is expensive. So you go high in effort to get more dense development. It's just going to become less affordable for people to buy or to rent, increasingly, of course, it'll be to rent. Whereas when you build like this, it's much more financially feasible and viable for developers to build like this, because you can build 10 houses, sell them, finance the next 10, sell them, phasing it's called. Whereas apartments, you can't build the first floor, sell it, build the second floor, sell it. It all has to be built in one, which means you're borrowing money for a much longer period and you're paying far more interest back over the development period. Whereas this, you can borrow, sell, borrow, sell, borrow, sell. And it's a much more financial. So that builds in affordability. So planning and things like density are incredibly, hugely related to affordability. And this is a difficult kind of message to get across to the high-rise advocates, that high-rise is great, but it's for high rollers. It's not for people on ordinary wages and ordinary families. So the Netherlands, remember, 3.5 times our population in a country. You could draw a line from Dublin to Galway and the south, that's the Netherlands. And they've got 3.5 times our population, and yet the same kind of typology of semi-Ds and terraced housing. And actually, I like an awful lot of housing. I think it would look really well here, and would look out of place, and it would be much more affordable than anything high-rise. The Department of Housing 2 years ago came out with their own study that said 6 stories is the optimal apartment size out, with, height for apartment buildings, which is spot on. And if you go to Spain and places like that, in most of the kind of regional towns and the smaller cities, that's what they do, and that's what we should be doing here. And then a few months later, then they lift the height caps. So anyway, that's how density fits into affordability. Finally, then, this is just the one I like being bold with. This one, it's just about politics. And I did this for Fianna Fáil a few years ago after thinking, and in fairness, you can imagine this stuff is not going to go down well in the ballroom of the Longford Arms Hotel. But in fairness to Martin and Fianna Fáil, they invited me back to do the same thing at the Ardèche, which is like 600 Fianna Fáil people. So this is about how we live and how it determines how we're going to vote, basically. So the red line there, so at the left, we're starting from 1966 here, this bit where they joined is 1966. And that's the time in Irish history where the rural population was exactly the same as the urban population. So 50% of people lived in urban areas, 50% of people lived in rural areas. We're exactly 100 years behind the UK, who had industrial revolution in cities and all that kind of stuff. So we're 100 years. So since 1966, you can see that the urban population, the red line, has been increasing steadily. So we're now somewhere around 63, 65% urban and 35% rural. That's the way we live now. Now, we have a very low definition of what urban is. It's towns or settlements of more than 1,500 people. That's how we define urban. If you go to Tokyo, it's more like 36,000 people. But anyway, that's how we do it. But the interesting thing is, if you track the share of the first preference votes of the main political parties, you'll see something interesting. So this is Fianna Fáil I'm going to show you, right? That's Fianna Fáil's share of first preference votes since 1966. And this is why I was surprised they brought me back, So this is the line. So it kind of tracks it that, the decline in rural Ireland is the decline of Fianna Fáil. And you can see there's obviously a blip in 2011 where nobody liked them, whatever, they voted them out and all that kind of stuff. And it's a fascinating, maybe it's a coincidence, but I suspect it's not, given it's 50 or 60 years of data. So that's their share of the vote. So, they know that there's an issue there in terms of that kind of split between rural and urban. How do you satisfy both people? And we're, we have a housing crisis going on and we're arguing over turf and awfully, so it's very difficult as a strategist, as a political strategist, to get that message across that appeals to both urban and rural, because housing is mostly an urban problem. And yet they're kind of caught between, not just Fianna Fáil, but the main parties. So it's not fair to just have a look at Fianna Fáil without having a look at Fine Gael. And pretty much they're on the same trajectory, that as rural Ireland declines, their share of first preference votes is also declining, kind of on the long-term running trend about the same as Fianna Fáil, just a few percentage points below. So that's where we're at with the main parties, and that's all about where we live and how we vote. And urban people will vote much differently to rural people, and we can see this in various referenda and things like that. The only county to vote against the same-sex marriage referendum as a majority was Roscommon, I think, and it's generally, and then you have Dunleary down, the most urban place, the most affluent place, as always the most kind of socially liberal in terms of voting for things like abortion and same-sex marriage and all those kind of things. Now, the other interesting thing is, so that's all very well. Let's take out the urban population. This is our urban population. The percentage living in urban areas has increased hugely since 1966. And then rather than going through each party, I just bundled all the parties together. So this also includes the PDs, who are hardly like lefties, and everybody else. So this is the independents and others. So Labour, the political, what do you call the Progressive Democrats, like everybody else in here, everybody who's not Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael over the years. And you can see the trend, the trend line kind of, actually it's more than the trend in the increase in population in urban Ireland. And just for the crack, and because I was being brave, the Fianna Fáil Ardèche, I picked out Sinn Féin, and we looked at Sinn Féin, and Sinn Féin again, the same trend of being very much their share of the vote being very much related to urbanizing Ireland. And this is why, like, the message from Owen O'Brien and whoever about housing resonates with urban voters. And housing is a hugely urban problem, really. So any party that can get down with the problems that are faced by urban people in housing is going to do well. Whereas I think the larger two parties have struggled to show their understanding or their appreciation of the problem of housing for urban voters. They're caught between, like, the 1 foot in the field and 1 foot, on the footpath in Dublin, and they don't know which way they're standing. Whereas some of the others have been a bit more, and not just Sinn Féin, but Social Democrats and Labour, whatever, a bit more, I think, they seem to demonstrate a better understanding of whether that gets translated into votes or whatever. I don't know, nor really care, to be honest with you. I'm not political at all, but it's very interesting to show that relationship between the two. And you can see this related in the vote. This is me in the Daily Mail of all things. 1989, Fine Gael had 15 seats in Dublin, and now has 8. Fianna Fáil had 21, and now has 7. The Green Party has gone from 0 to 600, well, up by 600%, which was okay, starting from a very low base. And Sinn Féin has gone from 0 to 9 Dublin TDs, and there's 8 new parties that didn't even exist in '89 in Dublin, including your People Before Profit and all these guys. So it's not just my analysis of that. It's coming through in the votes as well. So I find the politics stuff and where we live and how we relate to it, it's all fascinating stuff. That's just vacancy. I'm not going to do that because we're kind of out of time. And just finally, I promised I'd plug my book. That's the book, IPA.com. You can order. Easton's wanted too much of a discount, so it's not in Easton's, but it's in all other bookshops or on the IPA. Now you can see here, we're looking at all sorts of very interesting things like transport, regulation, philosophy, the dynamics of land. That's where Mel's tables come from there. Minorities, sustainability, policy making, human rights, gender. This is really interesting, housing, gender. You never hear anybody talk about housing and gender in Ireland, and it's fascinating what they're doing in Vienna. Home ownership, the state, rural Ireland, health. We never talk about health either. So there's a lot of stuff there in that book. If you're interested in buying it, please do. Thanks very much. Okay, we leave it at that. Thanks.
Thanks a million, Lorcan. There's a huge amount in that. We did have one question come in, which was a question on stats. So I thought I'll give that one to you straight away. And that's from Killian O'Sullivan, who's asking, do we know how many new social homes are apartments? And what is the assumption that 95% of new apartments are built to rent based on?
Yeah. Well, it's based on information from IIP and from whoever else came out with the CIF, that actually so it's based on information from institutional property and the CIF, as far as I remember. I took a kind of conservative approach. I took a conservative approach on that. The truth is, we're undercounting the amount of apartments that are out there because of the way things are recorded with revenue and forward funding deals and all that kind of stuff. Even if I reduce that, I don't know whether Killian's saying I'm right or wrong in this. But even if I reduced it, we're still not going to make a massive amount of difference to the percentage. The percentage is still on the downward decline. But yeah, I got it from, I'm 99% sure it's CIF and IIP. But the fact is, we're undercounting it because of the way stamp duty transactions have to be recorded with revenue and forward funding deals and so on. Mean they're not necessarily recorded in a way that appears at any one time or even as apartments. What was the first part of the question about the?
How many new social homes are apartments?
Yeah, I don't have a detailed breakdown of that because that would involve going through the 73 pages of PDF line by line. And I could ask Mel to do that if he wanted, but I suspect he doesn't want to do that. And that's because the data is presented. That's the way the data is presented. It's very labor intensive to have to go through it and break it down. It's something we could do though,
Okay. I don't see any questions coming in, but if you do have them for Lorcan, please do put them in. But I suppose that gives me a chance to abuse my my chairperson position. So it just, I suppose, one of the things is in the fall in numbers in 2021, particularly, is quite stark. But just, is there there's likely to be a COVID element to that as well? I mean, I think that I think your 7,000 number is an average, so it's you know, that holds. But I think just the impact of COVID on this.
Well, in 2020 and 2021, the amount of output was pretty much the same, right? 20,500 both years, 2676 and 2433. So about the same amount of houses built in 2020 and 21. Yet the number of houses coming to the market went down by about 1,200. So we had 7,023 houses coming to the market in 2020, and with the same number of housing output, the same amount of housing output, we had 5,698 in 2021. So it's actually kind of beneficial that it stayed the same, the number, because then we can measure. So you can see, even though overall output was down, I suspect if output had gone up in 2021, you know, if COVID had ended earlier, I suspect that that percentage of housing coming to the market would be even lower, to be honest with you, because output would be even more. But yes, I think that what would constitute the additional output would be more the social housing turnkeys and the apartments. There's a couple of things going on with the new housing coming to the market. And the first one is that, you know, I think the developers have spotted the sweet spot in the amount of housing that should go on a market every year in order not to saturate the market. And that's not going to happen anyway, I think, and also the central bank lending limits. But I think they've spotted that kind of sweet spot between how many houses we should build, you know, without undersupplying, so that we can, you know, we can look like we're doing something, and the amount of housing that will not saturate the market. Because as you can see from the residual valuation thing, the last thing that the house builders want to see is a decline in new home sales prices, because that affects the value of their land bank everywhere else. And that's a business strategy. I mean, that if I was running one of the large house building firms, I would be very careful about the amount of houses that I produced every year. And that's not to say that they don't want to produce housing, or I'm not accusing them of any shenanigans. Like it is just a fact that, you know, in a business, you don't want to saturate your own market. Otherwise, you'll do yourself damage, particularly when you own 10 or 12,000 other sites. Okay.
So then look from Michael Clifford, which I think is Mick Clifford. Am I right that this is, I'm reading, is Mick Clifford right, that the combination of social homes and build to rent has gone over 4 years from around 23% to 50%?
Yeah, he's adding the two numbers together. Yeah, I suppose, yeah, I'm just looking at this here, Mick. Yes, yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Okay, and then I see Carly Bailey here has a number of questions, so I'm just going to get into my chat box here. Okay, how can we find out how much publicly zoned land could be available to local authorities or AHBs to build on?
Yeah, there is loads of, and there's data out there from 2015, from 2018, and I think last year. If you look up Mel Reynolds' Oireachtas submission from earlier on this year, he has gone through all the data. And now, if I start pulling up my screen, I'm going to make a mess of what we're at here, so I won't do it. But if whoever's asked me that, if they want to email me, I'm actually, the Oireachtas submission will be online anyway, because it's publicly available. So it's a Oireachtas submission from, I think, January, February this year. Google Mel Reynolds. And you'll find it, and if not, email me and I'll send it to you, because Mel has gone through the amount of land, not only by local authorities, but also by NAMA creditors, for example. So effectively land that we control. And I know, like, NAMA debtors in Dublin City, Cascade, have about 97 hectares of land around the place, which is about, you know, 20,000 houses at O'Devany Gardens densities, and DCC themselves have 85 hectares zone land. So the information is out there.
Okay. So Carly's also asking, in terms of the social housing waiting list, did the numbers include those on HAP transfer list? The answer to that
no. That's another list altogether. Yeah.
And so do we have numbers on long-term leasing arrangements? Are they included as part of numbers presented for, say, turnkeys? No.
No.
This is what you're looking at is purely build, isn't it?
Yeah, output. Yeah. There was a time, and it gets, I don't know who's asking that, Carly, it gets a little bit confusing sometimes with the department, accidentally, I'm sure, that where things like, long-term leases over 10 years for a period were counted as new builds. They're not new builds. And indeed, like the changing the name of from turnkey, we call it turnkey purchases, because that's what they are, to, turnkey construction. It's again, it's slightly, it's semantics, or not semantics, but it's messing with names in order to give the impression of new builds, but actually they're new build, but they're built by somebody else. And I think it's always important to kind of just acknowledge that,
So with no more questions, I think one of the interesting ones that was your planning or development 101 graph. Yeah. I really like that one. Where you said, because I think the prejudice is that if house price goes up by 10%, that the developer will capture that in margin as opposed to in land value. And I think that's a really important, because actually it's worth more to them to capture it in land value than it is to capture it in margin.
Yeah. So if you take,
and I think that's where the understanding issue that you've raised is.
Yeah. Do you want? I don't know if I can share the screen again here and put that one up. Can people see that one now? Yeah. So what you were talking about there is if sales price goes up by 10%, so we get an extra 30-something thousand euro in there. The margin, at 13%, will give me 4,300 euro profit, right? But look at this. Down here, I'm getting like 28,000 euro profit on my land. It's all about the land. This is it. So even though, you're right. People think it'll just go straight to the bottom line, and sometimes it does, right? But it's very much about the land and the value of my land bank, the other land that I have, because it means then that I can turn around and say, if I want to sell 1,000 sites to Wayne Stanley Development Incorporated, that now when houses were selling at 370,000, I'd have to ask Wayne for 60,000 a site. Now that sales price has gone up by 10%, I can go to Wayne and say, I want 29,000 a site. That's worth an awful lot more than an extra, few quid on the sales price of the house. So that is all about the land, and it's very difficult to kind of to get that across out there, that it's not just this. And it's the same when they were brought in build to rent and everything, and hotels with student accommodation. The issue there isn't necessarily the build to rent per se. Okay, there's a room for that in the market too. The issue is the effect it has on all the other land around it. And that's what the problem is, because it increases the value of all other sites within a few kilometers of that site, which means that your Irish SME builder can't go in and buy that land now, because now it's valued on build to rent terms and not on homes for sale terms. And the SME builder, house builder in Ireland, has been forced to the margins hugely by planning changes that give preference to hugely lucrative and hugely valuable building types like apartments, built to rent, co-living, student housing, all that kind of stuff.
Carly is very busy here, so she's come back to us again with some good questions. What mechanism should be introduced to prevent land hoarding? So that kind of.
Yeah, you're looking at, I don't believe in windfall tax, which I think is what they're going to do later on this year. And actually in the Kenny report, I'm one of the few people in Ireland who has ever seen. So people will talk about the Kenny report to the cows from home, right? I'd say about 3 people have seen it. That's the Kenny report there, okay? It's really hard. It is really hard to get your hands on. My ex-boss left me a copy before he left office to go and chair the RTB. That's the Kenny report there. Kenny, so the windfall tax thing, I've heard various politicians and ministers say, oh, this is the Kenny report, we're implementing the Kenny report, windfall tax. Actually, Judge John Kenny says the opposite in the Kenny report. He says, do not implement a windfall tax, because ultimately the consumer ends up paying for it. So I'm not sure I don't sure a windfall tax is the answer, according to John Kenny anyway in his report. I suppose you need lots of, if you're an overseas purchaser of a property in France, you pay about 7 different types of property tax. You need things like, I suspect, use it or lose it planning permissions. You need probably land value tax, site value tax, but I don't think the windfall tax is the way to. You need to encourage people to use their land more productively rather than being able to sit on it for too long.
Okay. So do we, and the final, not the final question, but the next question is, do we have any sense of the number of SHD built to rent permissions that are then flipped by the initial developer.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So no, we don't have. Oh, sorry. So yes and no, right? As always in most things, yes and no. I'm afraid what I'm going to do here to myself. Let me see. Can I pull up? I have a presentation that I do on that whole SHD thing. I'm just looking for it as I'm talking to it, so we leave it. I can send it to the person. So there is a report that comes out, and it hasn't come out in a while, that looks at SHDs, and overall, I think it's in Dublin, less than 2% of all SHDs that were granted permission were ever built. So the numbers are very, very low, but yet you see the sites for sale quite a lot. So I suspect it's not been fast track planning permission, it's been more a fast track land speculation, where you can get your planning permission to flip the site. And I know even where I live myself, the site, about a kilometre away from me has been flipped loads of times. And it started off at 100 and something houses for sale, and it's now at 600 apartments for rent. And that everybody, there's people making huge profits every time the land is flipped with very little outcome. So a good question, and it would take an awful lot of work trawling through the revenue and stamp duty transactions to try and find that, I suppose. But I do have data on the amount of SHD applications that have ever been activated and constructed. And if they want to email me, I can send you on the link to that, or send you a copy of it. You can find it.
Brilliant. So we've about 3 minutes left, and I just wanted to spend maybe a couple of minutes. There's a couple of things that kind of are triggers for me that you mentioned. One is, for a very good reason, because of the way our sort of social system is set up. You mentioned things, phenomena like the property ladder, and by way of solutions to some of this, you've also mentioned the issue of density, which I think are really important. So I just sort of, I think we've talked about vacancy before, that that's kind of the low-hanging fruit that could maybe get us over some of the hump of the crisis, but that's not going to deal with the structure issue of we need to keep building homes and we need to get the balance in our housing system right. And I think density and the correct use of density that you've identified is an interesting one that probably
the way we've gone to it is we've gone very much a developer friendly, like lucrative approach to density, which isn't going to do much for the vast majority of people who need to buy a house in Ireland. And it's all about home ownership here. And I kind of berate myself for kind of banging this drum, because renting is a good option in many countries. But the reality is intergenerational wealth, personal wealth, we're all worth €175,000. Most of us won't find it in our bank accounts, but you will find it when you go home and you look at your house that you own. That's what your wealth is.
Okay. So are we just in 1 minute, are we missing a trick somewhere in terms of government policy? What's the one big thing that we're not doing? That's a ridiculous question.
Yeah. First of all, we're not doing any research. We're doing very little in terms of by way of being curious about things. So when proposals are put to us, there's very little analysis done about the likely impact of them. So building high, smaller units, all that. Somebody should have sat down and done the basics like we did here and worked out what's the impact of that going to be, and nobody seems to have done that at all. So I think the trick we're missing is that instead of focusing on housing as a market, we should be looking at the impact of planning changes on affordability, and planning and affordability are intimately related. And very few people are going to get that and realize that if you tweak things to make more viable and more output, actually quite often the net effect is actually less affordable housing. So what I would love to see in a government department, probably the Department of Taoiseach, to be honest with you, not housing, would be a resurgence of on First Forward or a research unit that was able to go through this stuff. And it's not hard. Our graduates could do it. To go through the planning changes and say, well, actually, guys, if you do this, this is the likely outcome for an average family on average wages. And we don't seem to do that. We don't seem to be able to do any sort of regulatory impact assessment prior to bringing in, on a whim, we bring in new changes about building heights. Lads, this is a bad idea. But you have to, that begs the question, who's making policy in Ireland?
I think that's a very interesting way to sign off on our thing. We've hit exactly 11 o'clock. We've done exactly an hour. And thank you, Lorcan, both for a really interesting and stimulating presentation, but also for keeping so closely to time. And thanks to everybody and everyone who asked questions and participated today. We will be sending on a a link to the talk, so please share it, and we'll send a PDF of, with his permission, we'll send a PDF of Lorcan's presentation. And please do keep talking and tweeting about our Simon Talks, and please do come back to us. We'll, if you sign up for the emails, we'll let you know when the next one is happening, which will be in a couple of weeks. Okay, so with that, I want to say thanks again to everybody, and thanks to Lorcan, and have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, Wayne. Thank you. All right.